Well, okay, everyone, that's the top of the hour, so we'll get started. Good day, everyone, wherever we find you in your day. On behalf of the Chartered Institute of Logistics and Transport in North America, hereinafter CILTNA, because that's quite a mouthful, welcome to day 2 of our virtual Fall Outlook Conference. I hope you enjoyed yesterday's session as much as I did, and I'm delighted that you've been able to join us again here today. My name is Paul Miller, and I'll be the moderator for today's session. As you know, we are fortunate to have a very full agenda with expert panels and speakers from the rail, marine, and air modes. So I'll be as quick as I can with these introductory comments. First, a very brief word from your hosts. The Chartered Institute of Logistics and Transport is a professional body of over 34,000 members working in over 30 countries worldwide. CILTNA, of course, is the North American branch. Our aim is to develop the science and art of transport and logistics through education, research, networking, and information sharing. And of course, today's webinar and conference are examples of that education and information sharing activity. If you're interested in learning more about the benefits of becoming a professional member of our institute, please see CILTNA.com. Secondly, a note of thanks and very deep appreciation to our sponsors who are shown on the slide on the screen there. This includes our national sponsors, the Greater Toronto Airports Authority and Canadian Pacific, or CP, and our session sponsors, the Chamber of Marine Commerce, the Port of Montreal, the Railway Association of Canada, and HarbourLink Container Services. We're very appreciative of your generous sponsorships of our organization. Next and almost last, thanks to all of our panelists and speakers today, each of whom have made a significant investment of time, much more than the few minutes that you'll see them here speaking with us, to bring us their experience and expertise and perspectives. Speakers, your knowledge of logistics and your willingness to share them are greatly appreciated, especially during what Deputy Minister Keenan characterized yesterday as an unprecedented time of disruption. And then finally from me, the inevitable webinar housekeeping items, and I'm sure we've all been on thousands of these by now, but just quick reminders. Your microphones and cameras are all muted, and please leave them muted for the entire session. If you have questions and comments, and we certainly hope that you do, please ask them via the Zoom chat feature. And I'll keep those questions in queue and pass them to the speakers at the conclusion of each panel. This webinar is being recorded, and in due course, a link to the recording will be emailed to all participants, and also it will be made available on CILTNA's social media feeds. And immediately following the webinar, we'll send you a brief survey, and we'd really appreciate it if you could take a few minutes to complete it. Okay, so that's more than enough from me on the introductory side. So let's turn our attention to our first panel, which will be addressing the rail mode, a mode that is very close to my own heart. You've all had access to the biographical sketches of our panelists, so in the interest of time, I'll make my introductions very brief. Speaking first will be James Clements, a 20+ year CP veteran who is now their Senior Vice President of Strategic Planning and Technology Transformation. If you've been following CP as I have, you know that they have a number of strategic initiatives and technological innovations underway. James is front and center on many of these, so I'm really looking forward to his remarks. Next, we'll hear from Phil Eng, who is president of the Long Island Railroad, the largest commuter railroad in North America. And under Phil's leadership, LIRR is undergoing nothing short of a complete reinvention of itself. So he has a fascinating story to share, including some observations on how a passenger operator serving the, at one time, very hard-hit New York metropolitan area had to deal with the pandemic. And rounding out our rail panel is Marc Brazeau, who is president and CEO of the Railway Association of Canada, or the RAC. Marc will speak to supply chain innovation, trade flows, the very important short line sector in freight railroading in North America, and also on developments in what I consider to be, I think everyone considers to be, our industry's core value, which is safety. So with that, James, over to you.
Thank you. I'm just going to fire up my screen here if that works.
Absolutely.
I'm just trying to share it. 1 second. I do not see. Very odd. I have it up, but I don't see my slides here.
Yeah, we're not seeing them yet either. At least I'm not. Oh, here we go.
There we go. Yeah. Apologize for the quick delay here. So being a publicly traded company, the first thing I have to do is the obligatory, I call it, forward-looking statements from the lawyers, just saying don't rely on anything I say going through this presentation to influence how you may decide to trade or not trade the stock of CP. So moving on from that, I'm just going to give you a brief introduction to the CP network and the scope that we have. We're a North American railroad. We serve both ports now, and I'm going to talk a little bit more to the CMQ, or both oceans now, the Atlantic and the Pacific, and then a fair amount of rail line going down into the Midwest of the United States. It's about 12,500 rail miles or so. And what you can see is we have a number of important trackage rights and connections to other railroads that extend the reach of our network as well. In terms of CP, one of our biggest priorities is safety. And I know Mr. Brazeau is going to talk about safety a little bit as we get into it. We're extremely proud of our safety record. It's the first priority of everything we do when we get up in the day till people go home, is we want them to be safe and go home the way they arrived at work. And in terms of train accidents at CP, our performance has led the industry for 14 years across North America. This is the frequency of derailments that are over $10,000 per million train miles. The other statistic that we're making progress on is personal injuries. And what you'll see here is a frequency rate of a reportable injury per 200,000 employee hours. We're not the industry leader necessarily in this one. It's something that obviously we're seized with in terms of becoming safer and not injuring our employees. And we've introduced I would say, a cultural shift at about 2015. We have a program we call Home Safe, and it's about accountability for safety for all of our employees, for not just themselves, but their coworkers around them. And what you'll see is that since we've made that cultural shift in our safety practices, we've got a steady march downward. If I'd thrown in some statistics from the past, we would have a good year, a bad year, a good year, a bad year. We were a little less consistent. But this cultural change that we've undertaken has really enabled sustained and continuous improvement in our injury rate. I know this is a logistics conference, but when you start talking about operating companies, this is so important that I felt I needed to lead with our safety performance. And to put it in context, I hope it shows up on the chart for you. This is the Class 1 comparison. So the big 7 railways in North America over the last 5 years. And on the top of the chart, you'll see the red line is CP, where we've continuously performed at the low end, which is good on that chart. And then the other chart, you'll see the decline from 2016 to 2020 and how that's positioned us relative to the industry. And what I'd say there is we're making progress. We're still not where we want to be. We'll never be where we want to be until we're at zero. So we'll continue to push these numbers down as best as we can, but definitely making progress and something we're proud of. Another piece of context before I jump into the material is I don't know how familiar all your members are with our business. And so this is a little bit of a picture of how our revenues break out by different segments. And what you'll see, we're about 22% movement of grain, 9% coal, potash, and fertilizers. And when you add that all up, that's pretty close to 40%. And we would describe ourselves as relatively bulk heavy in the railroad business, the Class 1 railroad business. So that's those first four buckets as you go around clockwise from 12 o'clock. The next ones, four buckets are what we would call our carload franchise. Relatively energy and chemicals heavy, if you will. We don't necessarily serve as much of the fiber basket in Canada in particular, or in the US. So our forest products is smaller than some, but we certainly serve the industrial heartland and the Alberta energy complex. And automotive is only 4.5% on this chart, but if you watch what's going on, and I'll talk a little bit about some initiatives in the automotive space, it's an area where we've been seeing good growth with some of our strategies to work with our customers and talk about supply chain solutions. And intermodal is also an area where we've been seeing really some good growth, and again, driven by initiatives with our customers about our supply chain strategies. And I'll give a little bit more detail on that as well. So that just shows you how we break out versus, I didn't give you the comparison, but where we generate our revenue from. Now, one of the topics is COVID-19 that I know is of interest with everybody. And you can see the first bullet fits that theme of safety of our employees. And that was, the priority from the first day we started seeing things going on. And we started initiating planning to establish a safe workplace. We put a cross-functional pandemic planning team together very early on in the process. We started to activate our contingency plans, our emergency operations center is what I was looking for there, to ensure that we could protect the operation of the railway. We're deemed an essential service in Canada and the United States. And, our customers move all sorts of goods that we need, food products, PPE, other things that were important and are important as we go through this pandemic. And the other piece I want to say about the cross-departmental piece is we engaged with our unions early on. And instead of saying, here's how we're going to do it, let's say if you're in a locomotive and you have two crew members, we talked to them about what we're seeing as science and suggestions and got their feedback. And we implemented, we listened and implemented a lot of what they were recommending to us based on their, understanding and living in the workplace day to day and what they needed to feel safe. And so with all of those actions and the other ones that I highlight here, we're pretty pleased with how our workforce has been protected. We've continued to successfully operate the railway without any service interruptions due to pandemic impacts. We haven't seen spread between employees in the workplace. And for railroads, it's important to note that, you can't fix track from home. You can't fix locomotives from home. So out of our 13,000 employees, we had over 10,000 at any one time, all the way through the pandemic, active in the workplace. And so, we're really pleased with how it's gone. We know that employees are going to have COVID. We've had positive tests. We have protocols for dealing with all of that. And, we continue to listen and refine. But overall, I would say that, we've been able to manage through all of the challenges that we've seen. I will make a nod. I know Mr. Keenan was on yesterday, but, the governments and regulators, both in Canada and the US, have really helped enable our success in recognizing the essential worker status that the railways have, and enabling us to continue operations even when there's been lockdowns. We operate across the border in multiple locations, and our train crews physically cross the border every day. And the governments have been very supportive of sustaining that cross-border operation. The other piece I'll say on COVID is that when we look at demand, it was certainly impacted in the short term, as we saw auto production facilities shut down. We saw certain industries pull back, and there was a lot of uncertainty early on. But as we've come into Q3 and people have really got their sort of feet under them in terms of their processes, we've seen auto production come back to normal. We've seen huge grain demand. And, currently we're actually running quarter to date in Q4 ahead of last year in terms of the volumes that we're moving. And so there was a short-term impact to demand, but we've seen some recovery. Certainly with the, rising frequency of cases in the population again, we're monitoring the situation. I wouldn't want to, forecast too much, but, if everybody continues to manage it effectively, we do think that demand will continue to be robust on the freight network going forward. So that's a little bit about COVID, just to speak to what is topical right now. One of the pieces that Paul had mentioned that would be interesting is sort of what we were trying to do when we bought what's called the Central Main in Quebec. It is a railway that on this map goes roughly from Montreal into the state of Maine, and then makes a connection with another railway that goes to St. John. And we do get direct access now with this acquisition to the Atlantic through Searsport. We also have a strategic connection with a railway that serves St. John. We were looking at that as extending our reach, allowing us to diversify our commodity mix. We felt it fit very nicely into our network. And strategically, what we also liked is that if you go from St. John to Montreal here, it's about 200 miles shorter than what the Canadian National can do, because they have to go north and hook around and get back down into Montreal. And so we felt there was the opportunity to put a new competitive product into Eastern Canada and develop the business that the short lines may not have had the resources. And then also with the single line haul, we can now take it in not just Montreal, but to Toronto, Chicago, Calgary. And so our network really brings some destinations to the Port of St. John, especially on the intermodal side. And we saw the early value of this in the fall when there was a strike in the Port of Montreal with the longshoremen and handling containers. And there was vessel diversions. And traditionally, if that had happened, they would have diverted into Halifax. The Canadian National would have handled all that freight. We saw ocean carriers divert freight into St. John. We ramped up very quickly and put on a daily intermodal service out of the Port of St. John to support those vessel diversions. And, we were very pleased with that result. I think that sets the stage and proves the capability of the route. When we bought this rail line, we also announced a substantial capital program to build the infrastructure and increase the speed so that we can continue to improve the service. It was a $130 million purchase, and we're going to spend about another $75 million in fixing up the infrastructure to increase speed and provide the level of service that we need to compete into those markets. So that's just a little bit on that acquisition, and the early results have been very promising for us. I'll skip this slide. I think I talked to most of it. One thing, and we didn't talk about this, Paul, but grain is really moving well, and we set records recently. And when you talk about supply chain, I thought what would be interesting is, how are we doing this? How are we achieving these record volumes? And one of the big things is really recapitalizing this supply chain as well. And so a hopper car is a rail car that you move grain in, you pour it in the top, and then it comes out of the gates at the bottom at destination. And we've been taking old antiquated cars that were built in the early 70s and putting in new rail cars, and they're shorter and they have more cubic capacity and they can be loaded heavier and operate safely. Just changing out the rail car gives us a 15% capacity gain. But then because they're shorter, we can do different configurations on the train. And then also we're reconfiguring our network and making investment, and you make them 8,500 feet. That gives us a second 25% gain. So with one train, we're moving 40% more grain. And when you think about that in terms of capacity on the railway, but in any supply chain where you can make investments that are giving you 40% capacity on one movement, whether it's a truck movement, an airplane, or a train, it really is compelling and exciting. And that's allowed us to really start to hit the records. And we've seen the Canadian National follow suit and now announce a similar large investment, multi-year investment in covered hoppers. This for us, just the cars themselves is 5,900 new cars. It's like $600 million. And then there's some sidings and other investments with our customers to enable that. And when I mention that, what our customers do is they build infrastructure that's far more efficient. So today we have to stop and cut the train into pieces. The new investments we've been working with our customers on, you go around a loop and you don't have to cut the cars into pieces. You just run the train around, load it up, and then pull out and leave again. And this allows us to load 40% more grain, but in 16 hours, where the older cars, we were loading them in 24 hours. And we leave the locomotives there, and it just enables efficiencies both in the customer facility, the train operation, and then at destination as well. So it's a big win for all the stakeholders in the supply chain. With that, I'm not going to read these stats, but you can see the total tonnage moved, and you can see the big increase. And we think we're on track to set more records in 2020, with 3 million tons in October being an all-time record. So it really is starting to show in the supply chain. I mentioned intermodal and automotive and some of the things we're doing relative to growing those sectors. And we talk about having room to grow. And what we're doing is we're leveraging our land footprint. And with the automotive side, we've built a new auto compound in Vancouver. That's what all these parked vehicles are on this slide, is an auto compound. That didn't exist in Vancouver 2 years ago. By building that and partnering with Ford, we have built a supply chain option versus unloading in Annacis Island that didn't exist. And it provides better service and consistency and reliability. And they chose to join with us for multi-years because of the capabilities that we offered for them to manage the flow of vehicles more efficiently and effectively. We've had others that have joined us there too since then. And we've done a similar build in Chicago. We have land that was vacant that's right next to O'Hare Airport, which is in the rental car market. And the timing may not be right now, but is the single largest rental car consumption point in North America. And we were literally, right off the east end of the runway kind of thing with our land. So that's one of our strategies, is leveraging our surplus land or unused land to create supply chain solutions for our customers that is hard for others to replicate. And what I'm showing you here is the building in this picture that says CP on it is a rendering right now. We're in construction. And we've also announced that we're building a transload and distribution center with Maersk. And we've just signed a multi-year shipping contract with them as well. leveraging this, where we're putting, again, solutions in the market that are hard to replicate. They're going to bring in ocean containers. They're going to de-stuff them. They're going to reload domestic 53-foot containers and then distribute them all across Canada. And we can also go down into the United States as well. So again, another example of how we're leveraging our footprint. And in the interest of time, I'll keep moving, but this is, one of our big growth strategies is how to, become integrated with our customers, build those supply chains, provide solutions, and not just be what I would call commodity rail freight. In the interest of time, again, I'll go through these fairly quickly, but we have a whole bunch of operationally focused technologies that we've been developing to enhance our railway. What this does when you put it in a supply chain context is it increases the consistency and reliability of our transit times. And in fact, we can also speed up some of our transit times by deploying technology. So the customer gets a better product, a better experience. And in many cases, we also experience a lower cost. So it's one of those win-wins where, cost control is actually delivering enhanced service and continuing to then allow us to be more competitive in the market. Again, I'm not going to go into the details in the interest of time, but there's certainly very interesting things being done. We're using analytics, we're using metallurgical analysis, we're using wayside detection where we're taking images and processing them so that we can find defects in rail cars while they're in motion, and using machines versus people on the ground and blowing snow at -40, and seeing a lot of dividends from technology on our network. So that's, Paul, I think, my allotted time, and so I'll hand it back to you for the next speaker.
James, that's just tremendous. Thanks so much for sharing those thoughts with us. We've got some questions coming in already, which we'll get to at the conclusion of our panel. So Phil, we'll turn over to you, and please go ahead.
All right, Paul, let me see if, can you see the screen?
Yeah, that looks terrific, Phil, perfectly sized.
Okay, perfectly. So thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to speak. And it's always great when I have a chance to share what we're doing here and learn from others as well. In fact, that was one of the things when I first joined Long Island Railroad back in 2018, that we had many challenges. Our on-time performance was headed in the wrong direction. The ridership had lost confidence in the railroad's ability to support them. And when James mentioned the disclaimer in the beginning about not believing anything, taking it to heart, I think our public had lost faith in what we were saying. So we really needed to show quickly that we could deliver and we could fulfill on our commitments to them. And that really was about customer service, about reliability, getting them to where they need to get to safely. Key component of what we wanted to do. A little bit about the Long Island Railroad. As you mentioned, it goes from Manhattan to the tip of Long Island, 3 western terminuses, including Penn Station. Not just lines, but branches. And in fact, one of our challenges is 10 of the 11 branches all converge at Jamaica. So whenever we have system issues or everything was so interrelated, how we run on one branch affected all the other branches. 124 stations across our system, 700 miles of track, 296 grade crossings when I first joined. We're down to 291. I'll talk a little bit about that. But obviously, Long Island Railroad has been vital to Long Island, to the economy for 86 years, our whole history. It's been vital through this pandemic, and I know how vital it'll be moving forward. And so back to day one when I first joined, what did we want to do? We wanted to change the mindset at the railroad. We wanted our managers, who were very knowledgeable, but also in some ways had their hands tied. Too often were we thinking about how can we best save money? One of the thoughts is If something was in a capital project, but it's several years away, then we could not invest in replacements. We were always responding, restoring service, but that would mean delays. That would mean reoccurring costs. That would mean unanticipated overtime and issues for our riders. We wanted to be more proactive. We wanted to treat things with more sense of urgency, and we wanted our customers and our public to have real-time information. So really what I wanted to do was create that mindset, let the folks know that everything is on the table. There are no bad ideas, and we needed to challenge ourselves to think outside the box and not only take a look at best practices across the globe, but perhaps create a few best practices of our own. And when I say Long Island Railroad Forward, that's what we dubbed this initiative, but it's really our mindset, always looking ahead and looking how that not only do we improve service today, but our decisions will help us in the future. So one of the key things was, as I mentioned, needing to tackle our infrastructure. We had components that were constantly failing, that were causing delays to our riders. And we would go in, we would fix it, but we wouldn't necessarily tackle the root cause. So what we did is we identified those locations and we made a conscious decision to go in, fix it now, fix it right, and address things. And it's not just necessarily a switch, but perhaps it was the drainage. So we really needed to go in and tackle things in much more depth, fixing it once and for all, replacing track, replacing concrete ties. We even enhanced ferry rail testing in some cases up to 4 times what FRA has recommended. And what we're doing is we're identifying those problems and we're improving service. We're seeing on-time performance go up. When I first joined, we probably had a record low for the last 10 years, and now we're running record highs. And we also knew that we could control things in terms of our own infrastructure, but we also knew that there were things that we couldn't control. Mother Nature was one of those things. Every year we were seeing storms become more severe. We were seeing more frequent events. So what we needed to do is figure out how can we mitigate Mother Nature. Taking a look at other practices, snow switch covers, we installed them through many locations, allowing us to move resources to other places during winter. Third rail heaters, very robust vegetation management. When I first got here, many trees down, utility poles is shown on this slide here. And what we wanted to do is go in and proactively address those issues and eliminate these things that were causing us delays. And then laser train, something I'm very proud of, because when I first joined in 2018, I mentioned Mother Nature. Well, we know fall season comes every year. We know leaves fall every fall season. And our customers knew that because of that, we had low adhesion, that we had slip slide. And just before I joined, we had probably our worst low adhesion season with many trains out of service, canceled trains, short trains, and a very angry ridership. So, I mentioned earlier, I challenged the staff. I said, let's think outside the box. They came to me with the laser train, something that had not been service proven, something that many railroads had felt the technology was not there. But we decided to take a leap of faith. We met with the manufacturer, LPS, and we said, how can we make this work for both of us? How can we make the laser a tool that Long Island Railroad can benefit from? And when it first started, it was only able to be used at 9 miles an hour. So we knew that that would not be sufficient for us to be able to use this, full steam ahead. But when 2018 came, we installed the laser on one of our trains. We piloted it, proved that it does clean the steel down to bare steel. Again, proactively addressing the root cause, not just using sandite that had been done before. Pressure washing we know helps, but didn't completely eradicate it. But the laser we knew eradicated to bare steel. What we needed to do was get this to operate in a much more efficient manner. But after that first year, we knew that it worked. So what we did over the course of the next year and then last year, we rolled out in operations the laser train at 50 miles an hour. And we saw a dramatic improvement in our low adhesion season. We saw a dramatic reduction in flat wheels. So what we were, just as Long Island Railroad Forward is, we spent some money and ultimately we're saving money because now the time our folks, our maintenance of equipment folks, spent repairing flat wheels, putting cars back in service. We were preventing those incidents. And then this year, we now have a second laser train working with LPS. We're now running them at 25 miles an hour. With both of those laser trains, we can cover any of our territory that we feel we need to on any given day. And we're just seeing the peak of leaf season right now. But so far, we've seen tremendous benefit from it. There's been many days where a misty morning would have created slip slide and flat wheels. We've not seen that to date. Obviously, still have another month to go, but very optimistic that this is one of the tools that will allow us to mitigate Mother Nature. Another area that was a concern for us, grade crossings. I mentioned we had 296 grade crossings, and now we're down to 291. Those 5 have been eliminated through grade separations, but obviously we couldn't do that across 296 given our budget issues. But one of the things we wanted to tackle was how do we make them safer for today? Out of the 296 back in the day, we had 65 of them that had parallel roads. And what we were seeing before I got here, 29 cars accidentally turning on tracks. And by May of 2018, we actually saw 21 incidents already occurring, and we saw a growing concern. So we wanted to tackle this. We wanted to find a way, how do we quickly get in and improve safety at our grade crossings? As you can see on the photo to the left, we installed flexible delineators, reflectorized. We put reflectorized pavement markings down. What we wanted to do is clearly delineate for the motorists where the tracks were and where the road was. And we did this in a manner that was safe for our locomotive engineers. But we also knew we wanted to do more than that. We also wanted to work, and we partnered with Waze. And using our GIS information, we shared this information. And on the right of the slide, Waze committed to and has delivered. People using this navigation tool are now warned in advance that there's a railroad crossing, not a road. So in the 17 months before we did this, we had 50 incidents with cars accidentally turning on tracks. And after we implemented all of this, we are at virtually zero. And the reason I say virtually zero is because there have been some accidents at grade crossings, not necessarily cars turning on tracks. So they count as an incident, but we've essentially eliminated this concern. Very pleased because even one incident I've talked about is worth the effort we've done. And I'm even more proud now Waze has made this a global initiative, working with FRA. And it's one of those things where we've protected our riders, we've protected our employees, and we're protecting the riding public that are using vehicles. Talked a little bit about customer information, customer communication, and the lack of their loss of faith that they had in the railroad. And what we wanted to do is to be able to give them real-time information so they can make decisions, so that they can be informed riders. And back when I first started, one of the first things we did was we installed GPS on all of our fleet. And not only did that give us the ability to let our ridership know where the trains were in the system and when they would be arriving at the various stations, but also improved our operational capabilities because then we also had real-time information on where our trains were. We built upon that using loadway, using cameras on our trains, and literally for under $200,000 using an in-house team, we took our train time application and we were able to convert that information into real-time information for our ridership, including our own operating personnel on car by car, carrying loads, taking that information to give the riders historical information so they could pre-plan, using that information so they could see where they're on a platform and position themselves in advance of the train arriving and entering the car of their choice. You know, and this is something I'm very proud of because we were working on this before the pandemic. We were carrying 91 million rides a year, over 350,000 a day. And we thought this was an invaluable tool before the pandemic so people can find space on our trains. And it's obviously proved more invaluable even now during the pandemic because of social distancing. You know, again, power of knowledge for our riders, whether they pre-plan to pick a train that has been carrying less ridership, or that on the day of, they can again pick the train car that has the least and give them more space to move about. Um, been an invaluable tool first in North America, and we're very proud of this ability to provide this information. Additionally, push notifications, track assignments. Again, it's giving our customers the ability to be in the right position earlier than when the train is ready to leave. So hand in hand with addressing infrastructure needs and communication was finding a way to continue to deliver on critical work. When I first started, design build was something the MTA was embarking on. We had a history of projects running late, over budget. Again, the public confidence and the need to invest in the MTA and Long Island Railroad was being second guessed. You know, why would we invest if you cannot deliver on projects? Well, I'm proud to say that we have been improving project delivery. Double track was one of our, and let me go to the next slide, I believe. Double track was the Ronkonkoma branch. Adding a second track there enabled us to provide redundancy, reliability to service, and in the future, the ability for reverse commute. That was finished in September of 2018 using design, build, best value. That was 15 months ahead of schedule, and that was on budget. The other two projects to go hand in hand with improving our operational flexibility and reliability. Long Island Railroad expansion, that's a $2.6 billion project that we did design build. For 70 years or for decades, that project had been on the shelf, long talked about, never done. We did that EIS in under 2 years. We did the procurement of a design build team in parallel with that EIS. So when we had the record of decision, we hit the ground running. I'm proud to say just about a few weeks ago, we hit the midpoint of that project. It's on time, it's on budget. That will add for 10 miles along our mainline branch, a third track, giving us, again, increased flexibility. That will go hand in hand with reverse peak, and that will also go hand in hand with east side access. Completion for both that east side access is June, the end of 2022. Now, east side access is a little bit of a different story. That's an $11 billion project. That is one done with not using design build. That has been historically one that has been delayed, but with the new MTA, with new management oversight, we reestablished a project schedule. Long Island Railroad has been supporting the east side access delivery and committing to the outages necessary to keep these projects on schedule. So right now that is on target for the end of 2022 as well. Once this is done, we will have the ability to provide up to 40% more capacity if needed. Now, obviously, we're battling the pandemic right now. We're running 90% of our service that we had been pre-pandemic, but that service is vital because I think, James, you mentioned how your service is carrying vital health and safety goods, and what we're carrying is those vital health and safety workers. And hand in hand, they all go together. You know, during the height of the pandemic, our ridership had dropped 97%, but we were still carrying a robust ridership service because we wanted to make sure our riders had the ability to get in and out and do it safely. And you know what? New York, the metropolitan area, Long Island, obviously the hotspot of the US in the very beginning. I'm proud of what we went through to be able to bring this under control. I know that we're all fearing a second wave, and New York, despite all of the rest of the US, still remains under, I think, just over 2%. The railroad itself, we had over 1,600 quarantines that have returned to work out of our 8,000 workforce, over 350 positives. Currently, we have about 77 employees in quarantine. But we're very proud of the way we went through it. And a lot of this has, as you mentioned, James, was working with labor leaders. A lot of this was getting out and about and talking to the employees because there was so much uncertainty with regards to the pandemic. You know, how do we do this safely? How do we not take this home to our mothers? How do we not take this to our uncles or brothers that have underlying issues? And it was not only just the physical part of eventually moving to full compliance with face coverings, hand sanitizers, but it was also how do we ensure that the mental state of our workforce was in a good place. And I'm proud to say that they stepped up. They heeded the advice. We're continuing to deliver on certain key projects that we feel are important for the future, but also important to serving today. And we're continuing to develop, support state of good repair like concrete ties, track replacement. The workforce has been phenomenal, and they're giving us the ability to deliver essential service. And what we're doing is telling the public, we've reinvented the railroad itself. It's cleaner than ever before. We're disinfecting every train car every day. We're disinfecting stations and touch points twice a day. In the beginning, we were hand wiping. We went to electrostatic sprayers. We could do a train car in 5 minutes. Face coverings went from recommendations to mandatory. I'm proud to say we're at 97% compliance of our ridership, and we're growing, and we're continuing to help support the use of this. At all our stations, ticket windows, we're giving out free face coverings. On the trains, managers and MTAPD continue to hand them out, and we're making hand sanitizer available throughout. It's just one of the key aspects of trying not to fall backwards, continue to move ahead. This, in addition to communications, has been vital to us continuing to support Long Island Railroad service, the Long Island Railroad economy, the New York metropolitan economy, and what we believe is vital to the whole U.S. economy. Other things that we're working on, technology, it wasn't just laser trains, it wasn't just ways and things of that nature, but we also want our riders to know that coming on the trains is safe. And we assured them that today that our HVAC and our ventilation systems are safe. It circulates fresh air every 5 minutes, 12 times an hour. That doesn't even count when the doors are open. But we're also testing new technology. One of the things that we're proud of is this 3-stage HVAC system that will replace our system. It's being tested right now using electric grids to kill 99.9998% of all airborne viruses, including COVID. That has been independently tested by an EPA-approved lab. And it's underway right now, both at Metro North Railroad and Long Island Railroad. And we think this is going to be not only a solution for today in the pandemic, but in the future, it will kill the flu, it will kill cold. And so these are the kinds of investments we want to make, not only tackling things for today, but making sure that we address and improve for the future. A lot more probably that we could talk about, but I just wanted to say how the railroad continues to deliver vital services. We're going to continue to see what we can do to be more cost effective. Obviously, we're weighing which projects move forward, but we know that mass transportation, and whether this was in my prior job at New York State Department of Transportation or here at MTA Long Island Railroad, transportation is vital to the economy. Transportation moves the economy, and without a vital multimodal transportation, the economy is in jeopardy. So we're going to continue to do everything we can to re-engage public confidence, deliver service. Even if we have to make cuts, we're going to do them strategically and look to support the regrowth of Long Island and New York. So I think, Paul, with that, I'll let the other speakers move on and be more than happy to take questions as they come.
Phil, that's just tremendous. We billed you as the gentleman that was going to teach us about a transformation of an entire railroad, and you've over-delivered here. Just fascinating and quite amazing what you folks have going on and what you've got coming up. So that's just great, Phil. Thanks very much. And Mark, with that, we'll just turn it directly over to you. Just one quick point. If folks have comments or questions for any of our speakers, please continue to submit them via the chat function, and we'll get to as many of them as we can at the end of Mark's comments. So Mark, please take it away.
All right, thanks, Paul. Let me just share my screen here.
You're an expert at it now, Mark.
Well, you know, practice makes perfect, right?
Right.
Let me see if I can bring up my smiling face here. All right. Okay, I think we're good.
We're good to go.
All right, good morning, everyone, and thank you, Paul, for the invitation, and Bob at CILTNA. Great couple of days so far. So listen, I think a number of you are already familiar with RAC, but just a quick overview. Our motto is people, goods, Canada moves by rail. And that's certainly representative of of the railways that we do represent, over 60 freight railways, a number of passenger railways, which carries on a typical year, because let's say 2020 was not a typical year, but 88 million plus passengers, and really moving certainly billions of dollars worth of goods right across Canada on a yearly basis. And I like to say that the railways are part of the supply chain, and we run 24/7, 365 days a year, and certainly very resilient, and we certainly saw that in 2020. Just again, a quick overview. We mentioned we got about 60 railway members, a combination of Class 1s, 2 in Canada, 4 in US, 38 short lines, 5 commuter passenger trains, 4 intercity passenger trains, and one segment of our membership which has been not talked a lot about in 2020, but certainly felt the challenges of the pandemic, and that is our tourism trains. We have several tourist trains who unfortunately could not operate during the 2020 tourist seasons, and then we have an additional 60 associate members who are also part of RAC. I'm not going to repeat what James said, but as you can see there, in terms of the overall footprint, both for CN and CP, and James made a point, CP going all the way to St. John, New Brunswick, as through the acquisition of CMQ. But we are the 5th largest network in the world. And when you think about the size of the railways, over 40,000 kilometers of track, which is 12% larger than our national highway system, and both CP and CN obviously operating both sides of the border, CN going all the way down to New Orleans and CP all the way down to Kansas City. The numbers speak for themselves. Canada's railways move Canada's economy. We generate significant economic opportunities and prosperity. And on a yearly basis, we invest significantly back into our infrastructure. And, that's something that I think we often talk about with regulators, is that Canada's railways do make a significant investment, do provide well-paying jobs, and do contribute to the public purse in a very significant way, and that's something we're all very proud of. If you look a little bit at the flow of goods, obviously the east-west, north-south into the U.S., into Mexico, critical part of what we do. Significant shipments, and certainly, James touched on this, a Western grain that moves through either the Port of Vancouver or the Port of Thunder Bay. We've got Canadian coal that's primarily exported through the West Coast. Metals and minerals, many shipments are within North America. And then on the auto side, obviously significant domestic and transborder shipments of North American produced vehicles, as well as imported vehicles coming in both Vancouver on the west side and Halifax on the east side. That's a bit of a breakdown there in terms of the freight portfolio. And again, James touched on this, is that we have seen record shipments of Canadian grain in 2020. And if you look at the trend in the last 3 years, it's a significant amount of grain, over close to 58 million metric tons. And that's going to be, an opportunity to grow that number even more as a result of the investments that have been made and are continuing to be made in the new grain hopper cars, again, that James alluded to. So, and by the way, those grain hopper cars manufactured in Hamilton, Ontario. So again, the spin-off benefits of rail with a significant employer in Hamilton, Ontario, National Rail Car, certainly benefiting from that, and certainly the railways will continue to carry more and more grain and do that in a very efficient manner. The short lines, as you mentioned in the outset, Paul, I want to touch briefly on the short lines, that critical first mile, last mile connection with a number of shippers. The short lines really serve the needs of a multitude of different shippers right across Canada. We have close to 40 short line members. They're generating millions in economic activity. They over 1 million carloads originated on the short lines, as I mentioned, in that first mile, last mile connection. And the short lines, they continue to provide well-paying jobs, just as the class ones do. And that's something that, we're going to continue to push for more support for short lines. The U.S. has a very defined, very proactive short line program with states and the federal government. And we certainly feel that there's an opportunity for more support for short line railways in Canada, and we continue to make the proper representations there. As I mentioned, the short lines serve a multitude of customers in regions right across the country, and that's just a glimpse of some of the companies who benefit from the excellent work that the short lines do, and then the partnerships they have with both CN and CP to make sure that those goods get to world markets. The safety aspect is number one. Again, as you mentioned in your opening statements, Paul, we believe that Canada's railways are among the safest in the world. We're obviously continually committed to improving our safety record, and if you look at for the past decade, Canada's railway safety record has been improving in the right direction, and that's something, again, that James alluded to. We're not going to be completely happy until we get to zero. Certainly it's a tall order, but it's one that we feel we have some great programs in place, some great services that are being delivered to continue to drive that. If you look at the amount of money that's invested year over year by Canada's railways, more than $3 billion in 2020 alone. A lot of those improvements are also earmarked towards improving the safety of the railways. So that's something that we're pretty proud of. The RSC has also had an ongoing relationship with the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, and we continue to drive the awareness of proximity issues. As municipalities and urban development occurs, we want to make sure that both the railways and the residents in those areas continue to coexist in a safe and responsible way. We run safety culture assessments on a volunteer basis with all of our railway members, and we measure employees' perceptions of safety culture, and then we work with the companies to develop action plans for improving their safety culture. And that's something that's been very, very well received, and it's something that we'll continue to provide to our members as we go forward here with safety commitments being promised and being delivered by our railway members. As I mentioned, the safety culture improvement initiatives, we conduct a number of surveys, focus groups where employees and managers can freely express their views regarding their company's safety policies, initiatives, and practices. These reports are developed by our team members, and they're provided to the participating railway companies, and that includes substantive information on their safety culture. And once that information is gleaned from those surveys and focus groups, the participating railways then develops an action plan for improving their safety culture. And examples of these may include the development of new training programs, awareness campaigns, creating new safety committees, and changing internal communications practices. And again, can't overstate the fact that Canada's rail safety record continues to be strong as technology improves, innovation occurs. Human errors remains a factor in many accidents, and we just want to make sure that these initiatives continue to address human risk factors by improving safety culture within the railways. One partnership that we're very proud of and was renewed again for another 3 years by the Minister of Transport, Minister Marc Brazeau, is Operation Lifesaver, Opération Gare au Train. This is a national awareness campaign. It's intended to educate and inform the general public about the dangers of trespassing, about the importance of being vigilant around railway crossings, because again, we continue to see too many incidents, either collisions or trespassing incidents. And we have to continue to, double our efforts in order to increase awareness and make sure that people are taking the right course of action when they're interacting with railways. And again, that's something that we've been able to renew our commitment with Transport Canada. It's been a great partnership. And obviously 2020 was again a year where we had to pivot with Rail Safety Week, which was held last month. But the good news I would tell you is that as a result of our increased presence online, we did more television, print ads. We increased significantly our interaction with consumers right across the country as a result of our significant online presence. So, one of the takeaways from COVID-19 here is that for Operation Lifesaver, we're certainly going to look at doing more things online going forward than we are in person. And because we've just seen the benefits of that through more contacts and more interaction with consumers. I mentioned already the initiative or the partnership that we have with the Federation of Canadian Municipalities since 2003. We really believe that if the various provincial jurisdictions, municipal jurisdictions, strengthened our requirements for municipal developments around proximity issues, that will go a long way for raising awareness of both the guidelines and the proximity issues and the benefits of that. So, we're certainly excited about where this is going. We have a new program manager that we recently hired who comes to us with a strong FCM background. And we think that, again, we have this great opportunity to have more partnerships, more awareness of the importance of respecting the proximity guidelines when it comes to developing in and around railway lands. I'm not going to repeat what both James and Phil have said. In fact, I want to commend James and his organization, as well as Phil and his organization, because both of them certainly, clearly indicated in their presentations that they were able to respond quickly as a result of the challenges posed by COVID-19. And obviously, we saw, an impact, significant impact on passenger railways in Canada. We continue to see that. The freight railways were very, very quick to respond, and certainly they are trending in the right direction. And in fact, my next slide touches on that, obviously still playing a little bit of catch up year over year. But I think as you look at at both charts, or the chart on the left, that the class ones, after a strong Q1, obviously some challenges in Q2, coming back and certainly in Q3, and hopefully when they post their results in the new year of 2021, we'll continue to see that trending in the right direction. But again, I think it certainly speaks to the resiliency of Canada's railways and the ability for us to continue to be very fluid and to continue to meet the demands of customers. If you look at the past 12 months, Paul, it started with a rail strike about a year ago, and then that became a rail blockade in the beginning of Q1, and then we faced the global pandemic, obviously at the beginning of or at the end of Q1. So when you think about all the challenges that we've overcome as an industry, the resiliency of that, and we continue to be responsive, and we continue to make sure that Canadians can rely on Canada's railways to move their precious goods and resources, as well as to provide a safe and environmentally friendly form of transportation for millions of Canadians. So that's really what I wanted to share with you, Paul. I know there's probably some questions, and hopefully we've allowed enough time for that. But that really is the message from REC. And again, thank you for the opportunity to be here.
Mark, that's just tremendous, and certainly notice the theme amongst our three presenters of the importance of having engaged with the employees, the importance of safety, the importance of developing that culture of safety, is just paramount for railways, and I would say for any transportation operator. So we do have some questions. We have about 7 or 8 minutes to deal with questions, and we'll do the best we can here. Whoops. little technical difficulty of my own. First one is to James Clements. James, to what do you attribute the progress in grain shippers and port terminals? So in other words, not the railways, but the shippers and the folks operating the port terminals, investing in higher throughput infrastructure.
I think there's a couple of key factors that have driven that investment. One, especially on the West Coast, we've seen the new G3 facility on the North Shore in Vancouver. We've seen other grain shippers, Cascadia and Alliance on the South Shore expand their capacity. Part of that's in response to demand. Overall, the highest sort of net back for the Canadian grain is to ship it off the West Coast to Asia. So as much as they can get out there, they can make the margin and they can, grow their profitability by investing there. I would argue Thunder Bay and into the US isn't as constrained. And so you don't need to invest to grow those markets as much. But in terms of the infrastructure to support the new trains and the rail cars, it provides efficiencies to them as well. So, just having a shorter car with more grain in it means that your labor is doing less work to unload the same amount of grain. The cars are also, they have 3 gates rather than 4, the new cars. So at the terminal, you're getting more grain unloaded and you're actually doing 25% less work. So it's much more labor efficient for them. And then with the density of the train being higher, you can just overall enhance without spending a lot on track how much grain you're handling on any train that gets spotted on your infrastructure. And that spot and pull kind of process is a constraining factor as well for volumes they can handle. So if they can see more grain coming in, they can justify an investment in speeding up their legs, enhancing their ship loading, et cetera. So there's a number of, let's call it holistic supply chain benefits that are creating the value for the grain companies and the terminals as well.
Okay, great. Thanks, James. Question for Phil. That really interesting question. Phil, can we expect these HVAC systems that you talked about with, killing pathogens with electric fields and so on? Can we expect these to be adopted and deployed in other modes, buses, airline, and so on? And if so, do you have any idea what the time frame might be?
Well, this technology is a 3-stage system. The first stage, the dielectric field filtration that kills the viruses, airborne viruses and bacteria. A second stage is UVC bulb that also, and then a third stage is when it's returning an ionization of the particles that also will continue to disinfect as the air comes back into the car. The beauty of the system is that it can be fit to and designed to fit different HVA systems. In fact, we're working with the manufacturer not only on our M7 fleet where it's being tested right now, but for our M9 fleet, for our C3 cars. We know that New York City Transit is working with them as well. So the technology is the key, but the adaptability of it is really important. We're optimistic that the testing will be successful. I'm hoping first quarter of next year, we can look to start implementing across our fleet. And then we would go as quickly as possible. The manufacturer probably can produce them faster than we can install them, is what we're told. Now, of course, if they start to produce them for others, then they might be more of a challenge. But we're looking optimistically of starting early next year.
Okay, that's great, and a real boon in passenger safety coming from that. Question again back to James. Is there any thought to reopening the line through the Ottawa Valley to provide an alternative to Toronto for traffic to Western Canada?
Not at this point in time, and I would say it would be hard to see it in the future because Eastern Canada, we've got sufficient capacity in the corridor and the network that having and maintaining duplicate networks doesn't create the economies of scale that we get by putting all the traffic through Toronto. The other thing is Toronto is a key sort of hub and pivot point on things like intermodal. And so again, it just makes a bunch of sense to flow traffic through Toronto for us for a number of reasons. So no, I don't think we'd go back to the Ottawa Valley.
Okay, very good. And Marc, a final question to you. Marc, I understand that municipalities have been, in general, quite slow to adopt the rail proximity guidelines. Pleased to note that you've recently hired a new project manager. Do you expect a significant expansion and uptake for proximity guidelines in the near future?
The answer is yes. We feel that we have tremendous opportunities to grow the adoption of the guidelines in Western Canada. So we hired a new project manager in Western Canada. That's someone that's on the ground, someone that has very good relationships already with all of the provincial governments out there. And as I mentioned, someone who came to us having served on the Federation of Municipalities as chair of the Railway Caucus and chair of the proximity guidelines group. So we're really excited about the opportunities that lie ahead. The guidelines, as I mentioned, have been around for a number of years. We did have early success, and then things kind of quieted down a little bit. So we really feel that this is a great opportunity for us to ensure that we get as many municipalities as possible here engaged, involved, and ultimately adopting those guidelines, because those municipalities that have adopted those guidelines, and in fact, we've had some provinces who've endorsed those guidelines as well. It has really, helped move the needle in the right direction here in terms, again, of that coexistence between the railways and residents and municipalities in a very positive, harmonious way. So we're excited about that, and yes, we do plan to see more adoptions in the coming years.
That's great. Well, listen, rail panel, I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it there. That just tremendous information that you've shared with us, tremendous innovation, tremendous strategic development going on throughout your industry, both passenger and freight. And again, James and Phil and Marc, we really appreciate you taking the time to share all of that with us. So again, thanks very much. And with that, we'll move to our second panel, which addresses the marine mode. And again, I'll keep the introductory comments very brief. You've seen the bios for our speakers in the package in the registration package. Speaking first on our marine panel will be Tony Boemi, who is a 45-year veteran. And Tony, you must have started when you were 8. I mean, I still can't get my mind around the 45 years. But anyway, a 45-year veteran of the marine industry who is now Vice President, Growth and Development for the Montreal Port Authority. Tony will address changing trade patterns, pandemic response, and the all-important topic of digitization of global supply chains. And following Tony, we have Bruce Burrows, who is president of the Chamber of Marine Commerce. And among other topics, Bruce will speak to supply chain innovation, pandemic response as well, and marine transportation policy initiatives. And again, all attendees, please keep your questions and comments flowing through the chat feature throughout the comments by Tony and Bruce. And we'll deal with as many as we can at the conclusion of Bruce's formal remarks. So Tony, with that, over to you.
Thank you very much, Paul. You can hear me okay. So I'll just share my screen. So can everybody see this?
Not quite yet, Tony.
Okay. Still nothing?
I'm not seeing it. I wonder if it's
Okay.
just me.
Okay, let me reboot it. Just give me a second. Give me a sec. Okay, let's try that again. I was testing this all morning, and of course, when you really need it, it never works.
Always the way.
Yeah.
Tony, would you suggest maybe we go to Bruce if Bruce is ready and then come back to you? Would
Yeah.
that be helpful?
Yeah, that would be good. Yeah, because I don't know what's going on all of a sudden, but I'll certainly fix that up. All right.
Okay, very good. So Bruce, if that's okay with you, we'll start with you.
Yeah, that'd be fine. Let me just see if I can successfully pull my presentation up. Paul?
We've got your screen, so I think as long as you pull up your presentation, Bruce, will be great.
Yeah, I'm just,
Probably just in your PowerPoint down at the bottom.
yep, hold on a second. Do you see that?
We do, so just open up the slideshow and we'll be all set.
Good, okay.
Next one over. There you go.
Perfect.
Perfect.
Okay, well, listen, thanks very much, Paul. I'm very excited to be here and provide a deeper perspective on the marine sector and what has been a game changer of a year for transportation writ large. Certainly the maritime mode has not been spared that hand of change. And as Mike Keenan said yesterday, the passenger side of our business has had its business models turned upside down. I noticed Carnival, which is the largest cruise operator in the world, with sub brands like Holland America and so on, that their stock price was up 39% yesterday in one day as a result of that vaccine news. But I plan to focus my comments today on cargo, just to make sure we have a balanced picture of what's going on in the marine sector. And I'll just give you a brief introduction on who we are. Some of you may still not know much about the new Chamber of Marine Commerce, CMC. And I'll give you a bit of a quick overview on the benefits of marine, because I think that's important to a groundwork of understanding before getting into specific COVID impacts, and in particular, the economic recovery required going forward. So who we are and our mandate, we are now, after merging the old CSA with the old maritime interests, we are a unique North American binational industry association of 130 members, including Tony and other ports, key Canadian ship owners, many cargo shippers, and various miscellaneous suppliers and service providers. And our mandate really is starting off from a regulatory perspective, just to quote the Prime Minister, we do want to pursue shared regulatory outcomes that are business friendly. We operate across the border. A typical ship might change the border or go across it 23, 24 times from start to finish. So that shared border and its regulatory application is very important for us. And therefore, while pursuing that regulatory outcome, our mandate is really to support safe, sustainable, harmonized, and competitive policies that recognize the system's advantages in the Great Lakes, the St. Lawrence, coastal and Arctic regions. I want to take a few minutes to look at some of our key benefits. And Mark had a similar sort of page for rail, and this is the marine page that summarizes the benefits, at least from a Great Lakes St. Lawrence waterway perspective. So all the Great Lakes going right down to the Atlantic Ocean we're operating in an area that represents about $60 million of marine-related economic activity, 328,000 jobs, which, by the way, are about 110,000 jobs in Quebec and 70,000 jobs, so across the whole region. More than half are on the Canadian side of the border. I'll just take you, this is, by the way, a recent study. It was done in 2017 with John Martin and Associates. So he looked at the entire $6 trillion economy here and answered the question, so what does marine mean for this economy? And then looking forward to some of the other key benefits, let me just quickly summarize. Our ships can carry an enormous amount of product in one ship load, where the relative efficiency of marine hasn't really changed much vis-a-vis rail and truck. An average ship is about 1,000 trucks, so you can start to imagine in your mind some of the efficiency advantages from marine, both from a physical and from a cost perspective for shippers. What has changed, though, interesting enough, according to a study that we just did with Research and Traffic Group a couple months ago, is that the relative sustainability advantage has even grown further for marine. And if you take a ton of cargo and move it on a ton of, or rather a liter of fuel, a ship can now go 360 kilometers. It used to be 240 kilometers going back to the last study, which was done in 2011. And the relative sustainability, again, has improved vis-a-vis the other modes. So that's a gap growing in our favor, and it's obviously a good one from a greenhouse gas and generally environmental green perspective. And on greenhouse gases and carbon reductions, same advantages hold true. Some of you on this call are familiar with marine and the hot topic of reducing greenhouse gas emissions in the short term. Globally, it's a key discussion we're having. And we're starting from a base that's very attractive from a carbon footprint perspective. Again, vis-a-vis some of our other modes, it's, we are a smaller contributor in terms of greenhouse gas emissions and transportation writ large. But governments around the world are struggling with how to bring in new efficiency targets that will help reduce greenhouse gas emissions in the short term. We still have more work to do. In the meantime, as a sector, we have decided on the industry side that we'd like to reduce carbon emissions by 50% by 2050 and then lead to a carbonless world. We've made that pretty clear publicly. And there will be lots of ways to do that, but we need to get going with some more focused research, and we want to do that collectively as an industry. And then look at best practices and best technologies. So that's certainly something important, and it's going to continue post COVID. Let's look for a moment at the impact that we're experiencing right now because of COVID. It's hit our sector hard after an unplanned delay, in fact, to the opening of the Seaway, which was pushed back to April 1st. We had a great season for opening, terrific warm weather, no ice, and we could have started in mid-March, but because of high water and public concerns with the International Joint Commission, the various powers that be with our consultation elected to start off April 1, and that was an $80 million hit to the industry. And then just a couple of weeks later, whammo, COVID hits us. Ironically, just a couple of weeks before that point, Air Canada called us and said, look, as a result of the blockades on the rail lines, we need to move more jet fuel product up into our distribution centers in Ontario. Can you help us out and get going early with your tankers to move a jet fuel product out of the refineries in Quebec? And unfortunately, we were stuck with this delayed opening. And then, of course, how quickly the world changed. We haven't heard from Air Canada again, strangely enough. I'm only kidding, of course. It's been a tough year, and there's a surplus of jet fuel oil, unfortunately for us. On the sort of planning for the year perspective, I just go back here just a one second. We've had a pretty straightforward plan now to manage COVID. It's really focusing on three critical aspects of the business. It's the extreme focus on people, essential service operations, and markets. And looking at the first one is people. I have to be honest, we had planned for a first COVID case on a major cargo ship somewhat sooner than when it eventually happened in October. We did have a small outbreak of 5 crew members at a ship in Sarnia. They went into quarantine, but we were sort of planning for it to happen earlier. And I think it's our focus on number one, protecting our people, has really paid off this year. And that's been our number one job, to ensure the health and safety of and mobility of crew members. I say mobility because we move crew members regularly from places like Vancouver all the way east to St. John's, Newfoundland. And so we require a high degree of mobility and cooperation with the airlines to keep our crews moving. And of course, COVID really has made that very challenging. But it's working, and we have put together a very aggressive volunteer-based Trusted Partners program, and that program really is an 8 or 9 point program that keeps us all safe. A lot of standard practices to ensure that our crews are safe. They operate in a bubble, 15 or 16 crew members at a time. They're on a ship weeks at a time. So it's critical that they're safe, and it's critical our partners on shore know that they're safe, because there's a lot of interaction when the ships come and go at port side. So that Trusted Partners approach, which is signed by all the key members directly, has really paid off, and it's got even some international recognition. We're pretty pleased by that. Actually, just one other point I should make in terms of people, are perhaps more from an essential service perspective. That really is our next goal, or has been our next goal, to ensure that marine is considered essential. And cross-border services remain in place, very much like the other modes as well. You can think of the average or typical image of a truck having to cross the border every day during this period of the borders being shut down, and it's really no different for marine. 45% of our business relies on cross-border trade, so that's a pretty critical part of our business. And again, we've been pretty successful keeping those marine supply chains open and running. And a lot of help has been required from health officials on all sides of the border. Transport's being very supportive and happy to work with us collaboratively to keep these supply chains open. And so kudos to Transport for doing that. I would say thirdly, on the economic side, regular monitoring and frequent reporting of developments in the marketplace was also critical importance for our members, and still is, in fact. Things are moving quickly from an economic perspective, and we wanted to make sure that there are no impediments put in place or undue cost burdens put in place. So we've also initiated what are now less frequent economic updates. I think a number of people on the call have been reading those regularly. As far as the macro economy is concerned, the real test will come during the second wave for us, I think, particularly as some government support, perhaps south of the border in particular, starts to soften up and wind down. I think this could lead to a little more of a crunch in terms of consumers spending less, saving more. And we'll see what that really means for the economy. So we're pretty cautious at the moment, Paul, I think, in terms of what's next during the next 6 months. Most of the Canadian carriers and ship owners their lines of business have expressed or experienced some pretty significant drops, some by as much as 25, 28%, although on average it's probably a 15 to 20% so far. We did a pretty close measuring in the summer. The Seaway, which is roughly 20-25% of overall business, is and is a good proxy activity, is seeing activity down through their system by about 8% year to date versus 2019. That drop, by the way, is narrowing a bit. The fall is a very heavy time of the year for marine. But some ship owners have had vessels laid up 30% more of the time than last year. In total, we've had 14 or more vessels laid up. Most of those are now finally coming back into service. But we've also had 10 to 15% reductions in ship-based and onshore staff. So some of the ports, and Tony will report on this in a moment, are seeing these sorts of decreases as well. Montreal, which is both a cargo and container port, is seeing some strengthening in the container side recently. And so its reductions for 2020 will be probably just below 9%, but nevertheless, still a reduction. What's been interesting this year, and just like the rail sector, prairie wheat and grain has really saved our bacon. It's arriving, for example, steadily in Thunder Bay. So James, keep that flowing into Thunder Bay. We like it and want more. It's been a great harvest year, the current or new harvest year. Soybeans out of Ontario going strong. So its grain is probably up 20% this year versus last year overall. Salt, sugar, green energy in terms of wind turbine projects. We move all of those sorts of things on the project cargo side. Also showing very remarkable resiliency this year. But those highlights, don't offset the obvious reductions that we're seeing. Liquid bulk, I mentioned jet fuels earlier. It's down probably 30%. So far this year. Iron ore movements are down 20%. Dry bulk is about 12% down. So, overall still a negative picture, but we are making up a little more traffic through the end of the year, we hope. Just looking quickly on the gateway overall from a policy perspective, the system is really a great strategic asset. We do have capacity to grow, safe, environmentally smart. It's a 3,700 kilometer long marine highway cutting through the interior of two countries. And, countries through Europe and other parts of the world really do see it as a gold standard to be able to move product like this. So it is a made in Canada wonderful asset, and it's something that we're obviously encouraging partnership support from the Canadian government to grow it even further. And in total, we're handling about 380 million tons of cargo in a typical year, but that's going to be somewhat softer this year. And then finally, just looking at policy and innovation, if I can, for a moment, before touching on a plan going forward. From an innovation policy perspective, the marine sector is certainly ready to do its share of increasing productivity in the economy. I think increasingly any recovery plan is going to be looking at ways to increase productivity. This is where workforce development and people become so critical in continuing to attract and retain employees. Career awareness building, we're putting a lot of effort into that. Digitization is critical, obviously, to making both efficiency and further safety gains. And Tony, is part of a key global effort in this field, and he'll, I know, talk a bit more about that. our equipment, our research and development. And these are all going to be super important going forward. You know, we have a core large cargo fleet of almost 90 ships in which we've invested tremendously in this hometown fleet, as I like to call it, over the last 5-6 years. You know, putting ferries and some barges aside, really the bulk of the fleet, it's about 80% of the Canadian fleet is within the CMC membership class of ship owners. You know, we are the ones proudly employing Canadian labor and paying taxes and deploying a high degree of training and certification, adhering to strict safety codes, meeting or exceeding environmental standards. These are all the good things that the Canadian fleet is doing. Our competitors south of the border have a much older and larger fleet. We're able, through our sort of world-beating style of self-unloading technology, we're able to sort of squeeze through all the locks and land at ports that don't have much infrastructure in terms of loading and offloading, hence the value of a self-unloading technology. We're pretty proud of this Canadian technology. It's increasingly used globally. You know, we move rapidly between ports in often less than 24 hours. So it's a rapid delivery system and therefore efficient and getting more efficient. So, you know, these are unique ships for Canadian and American domestic waters. As I said, the American fleet is an older fleet, too large to go through, most of them too large to go through the Seaway lock system. That part of the territory is pretty much left to the Canadians and some international ships. But the Americans are getting more aggressive. And so competition is certainly alive and well. And we have to be mindful of some creative things that are being done south of the border in that regard. Maybe I'll just wrap up finally, Paul, with just a quick reference. We've thought a lot about what is needed going forward if we're to meet the health, safety, and productivity challenges I spoke about earlier. And we've put together a 9-point plan that includes various things, starting with emissions improvements. And we're calling on government to support some much needed R&D efforts in this regard, particularly with alternative fuels, but some other things as well. Expanding the national shipbuilding program, particularly around icebreakers, which we obviously rely upon heavily. Building climate resiliency. And this is another key area going forward. We've smacked into this problem with high water in the Great Lakes and St. Lawrence River, and it really all points back to climate change and climate resiliency. And so there's definitely a lot of joint work required there, and we're encouraging governments to do that. North Atlantic right whale protection is an area we've identified here with this 9-point plan. Improving transportation data collection. You know, we have fallen short of the other modes in terms of the centralized data collection and statistical collection at the federal level. When Stats can pull out of that field, we certainly are encouraging governments to get more involved there. Reinvesting in the National Trade Corridors Fund, very important for our port members and others. So we are asking the government to have a look at restocking the National Transportation Fund, as it were. Calling for additional investments in navigational technologies, modern navigational technologies along this marine highway. If you can imagine it just like Highway 401 and putting modern signs in and proper exit and entry ramps in place. And our equivalent is the buoy system, all season buoys and so on. So we're certainly encouraging that investment, full digitization of Transport Canada's marine safety security programs, investments in ballast water technology. Again, this is something that we feel we can collaborate with governments on. These are all things that ultimately in the public interest, and we're very encouraging of this type of approach going forward if we want to successfully recover and grow this key trade corridor going forward. So maybe I'll just leave it with that, Paul, and turn it over to Tony, who hopefully has his slides up, and then we can continue the conversation. I'm happy to answer any questions at the end.
Okay, that's great, Bruce. So let's do that. Turn it over to Tony, and over to you, sir. And here comes your screen, and here comes your slide. So we're all set. Tony, I wonder if you're perhaps on mute.
Yeah, sorry. So do you see my slides now?
We do indeed. They look great.
All right, great. Okay, good stuff. All right. All right. Well, okay, good. Thank you very much. And thank you very much to for giving me this opportunity to speak to you today. And I always enjoy doing working with the CILTNA. So today, basically, I'll keep it quick. I won't be too long, seeing that it's lunch hour. So basically what I'll cover is I'll give you a very quick overview of the Port of Montreal. I'll talk to you about where we are in our labor issues in terms of our infrastructure projects, and just finally on our innovation and technology and all the work we've done there. So just to give you a quick overview, for 2019 was another record year for us. It was our 6th consecutive year at the Port of Montreal. As you can see, we're fairly diversified. We do a lot of liquid bulk, dry bulk containers, and of course the cruise ships. Of course, I wish I can say the same for 2020. In the first quarter, we were heading again for another record year, but of course, similar to what Mr. Brazeau mentioned earlier in terms of the challenges they had, we also had a bit of the triple crown, where we had the rail blockade, we had COVID-19, and of course, in our case, we had the port strike. So with that in mind, we're probably going to finish off the year on containers with actually surprisingly so, maybe a minus 6%. Bruce, I thought you'd want to know that in the month of October, we had a big surge on the grain business by almost plus 20%. And of course, on the liquid bulk, well, because of the lower consumption, and so will be done as well. So we're probably going to finish off the year, I would guess, with roughly about 36 million tons compared to 2019. So basically, Port of Montreal, of course, the big advantage that we have is our geography. So basically, we're located 1,600 kilometers inland from the Atlantic coast. And really what that means is, from a truck perspective, we can access 40 million consumers within roughly about 8 hours of trucking. And of course, we can access another 70 million consumers with roughly about 48 to 72 hours of rail. We are benefiting from both Class 1 railways, namely Canadian Pacific and Canadian National. So what's really unique about Montreal and what really differentiates us from other ports is that we are a destination port. And the reason I mention it is twofold. From one perspective, because it's a destination port, what that means is that vessels get completely unloaded and completely reloaded. So we basically operate the vessels 100% unload and reload. And what that does is it really contributes to a trade balance, especially for the carriers. So the ratio between import and export is never more than 5% on any given year. And of course, many people bring up the subject of mega ships. And as you know, Montreal is not a deep water port. But I think what gets lost in the conversation, excuse me for a second. I think what gets lost in the conversation is that with the size of the ships that come into Montreal, I mean, we actually load and reload more containers on average on one vessel than any of the ships that you would find that navigate on the eastern seaboard. And so in other words, large vessels do have a purpose, but their purpose is really when you're doing multiple port calls, where in our case, it's a single port call. Supply chain resilience. Look, we all experienced the COVID-19. I would say that in the end, it was managed very well. I can remember when this first came about in terms of when it hit our shores, I would say in the month of March at the port. You know, Transport Canada, Health Canada put in a lot of measures in terms of how to maintain an operation while this was taking place. And I can remember the first case that was reported, I think we shut down the port for like 12 hours. So obviously, even though we had received what measures we had to put in place, I think by the time everybody just got used to this new way of working, certainly struggled at the beginning. But I would say that since then, it's been very transparent. There's been absolutely no delays as a result of COVID-19. When there are cases that do come up, they are dealt with immediately, and it's really had no major impact in terms of on our productivity. Also, one of the things that we were doing during that period is we were dealing a lot with the governments. If you recall, when the government first had that shutdown, what they wanted was only that essential services or containers for essential services be able to be moved from the port. Well, we saw that as a problem initially because of the fact that, for example, if we couldn't move just regular containers, just carrying regular commodities, then obviously it was going to congest the ports. And as a result, not have the ability to get to those containers that were considered essential. So from that perspective, we had actually worked with Cargo M, which is a logistic cluster in Montreal, and we're able to map out throughout the whole city of Montreal storage space that would have been available had we had to move containers to these locations so that we maintain fluidity at the port. In the end, we didn't need it, but the work nevertheless was done on it. In terms of labor update, so as you know, for example, we experienced a strike this year, and just to give you a bit of an update, we lost roughly about 33 days of work. Just give me a second. I lost my. No, sorry. Just give me a sec. All right, yeah. So basically we were on strike for roughly about, I'd say collectively 14 days or 13 days. And, you know, sometimes we talk about the importance and how strategic ports are. You know, today being November 10th, yesterday I got my first report. We actually went back to work on August 21st. Yesterday I got my first report that the Port of Montreal is now back to normal. And here we are on November 9th. So you can imagine for 2 months, it took us 2 months after a 13-day strike in order to get back to normal operations. I think that's something that we need to keep in mind going forward about the impact that these strikes have on port authorities. On the other hand, I think what's a bit misleading is if you look at our history at the Port of Montreal, basically since 1995, we've basically lost roughly about 32 days of work resulting from work stoppages. And the reason I bring that up is because at the Port of Montreal, if you look at historically in terms of the contract negotiations, they seem to drag on for long periods of time. As a matter of fact, as we enter November and December of this year, the existing contract, which is still not resolved, has been under discussion now for over 2 years. So we are back at work, although it's a truce that was decided on. So that truce lasts until March 21st to be exact. We are putting a lot of pressure on the Maritime Employers Association to ensure that they're able to come to a conclusion before the end of the year. If you consider, for example, that we've lost roughly about 2 months of good productivity, or it took us 2 months to get back to normal operations, I think during this last strike, it kind of caught everyone, I would say, by surprise, especially the fact that it lasted 13 days. I would suggest that if, for example, we don't have a resolution by the end of this year, prior to the March 21st deadline, that I can see cargoes being diverted to other ports where people will actually plan for it so that they don't get their cargoes tied up in the individual ports. So I just wanted to bring that up. In terms of a future, we have a lot of infrastructure projects that are in place. As a matter of fact, again, when COVID hit, a lot of the governments were coming to us or people questioning us as to whether we were going to cancel certain projects. In actual fact, it's the complete opposite that happened. Governments were actually coming to us, really pushing us to move forward on these projects. Of course, for the main reason that they wanted to jumpstart the economy once we get back to quote unquote normal. So we have 5 major ones that are going on right now. We have Bickerdike Terminal, which is where the OceanX vessels dock, and that's basically for a service into Newfoundland. We have the Grand Quay, which is our cruise terminal. If anybody takes a walk in Old Montreal right now, you see that they're putting up a 55-meter tower. Of course, we're doing work on our railway system, on our road link, in terms of having better access to major arteries in and around the port area, and to Vieux Terminal, which is an expansion of an existing container terminal. If you look at Vieux, that was part of a 2-phase project, 600,000 TEUs. First phase was already completed, and phase 2 is expected to be completed by the end of this year for another 250,000 TUs. If you look at our railway system, it's being optimized. You know, the Port of Montreal, for those of you who may or may not be aware, we have quote unquote a short line railway at the Port of Montreal that we manage. It's roughly about 100 kilometers of track. Every terminal has a ship to rail operation. And so what we're doing is we're increasing our rail capacity by roughly about 20%. That will have a direct benefit on both our container traffic as well as our bulk traffic. And of course, the last major expansion that we have is Contrecoeur. So Contrecoeur, which is located roughly about 40 kilometers downstream. We're building phase 1, which is 1.15 million TEU capacity increase. The big advantage that we have with that particular terminal is that it is an extension of the Port of Montreal. It's being built to meet growth. So it's not a project where we're build it so that they will come. So we actually need this expansion to maintain our current growth levels. We're building 2 berths. Again, one of the big advantages, it currently serves as a bulk terminal. We do roughly about 3 million tons of iron ore with ArcelorMittal. We also do roughly about 500,000 tons of fertilizer. We already have a railway network. CN already has a link into that terminal, and we're just off of Highway 30. So when you look at port authorities, in terms of when you look at infrastructure, and when you look at surrounding infrastructure, all the elements are there. And of course, in this particular one, all the financing is done. You may be aware we got $300 million from the CIB, Canada Infrastructure Bank. We raised our borrowing limits at the Port of Montreal from 120 million to 480 million. We were the only port in Canada which was able to get that authority from the federal government. And of course, we have the investors right now that are just negotiating or fine-tuning the final agreement. As well, all the environmental studies are completed and have all been accepted. So we're moving forward there. Innovation. We invest very heavily on innovation, and you'll see where Montreal has become a real leader. So Centec, for example, is there's 4 pillars. So Centec is basically, in French, is École de Technologie Supérieure. So basically, it's an accelerator which houses a lot of startup companies. So in our case, we have our own cell, as they call it, or let's say we have a room at Centec, and where we have a lot of startups that actually work on a lot of projects for us. So we give them, for example, challenges, and what they do is they try to work out these projects and to see how we can better improve port productivity, port infrastructure, so on and so forth. So I just wanted to show you one example of the work that we're doing. And so, for example, one of the projects is emulating the port in 3D. So we call that twin porting or port twins. And so what that does is it enables us, for example, to develop a 3D model. And through that 3D model, we can basically emulate whether we put in infrastructure at certain areas of the port. These models, of course, were all taken through using drones. And so we can emulate, for example, fire and safety. If, for example, fire trucks have to come in through a certain gate. So basically what it does, it's a little bit like a video game, and we're able to move buildings around, build infrastructure, remove infrastructure, so on and so forth. So that's one of the projects that they completed. We also developed a tool for that basically provides waiting time at each individual terminal. And so, for example, as you know, as I mentioned before, the ships are full vessel in, full vessel out. So you can imagine that if a ship arrives to the port on a Friday night, you can assume that Monday morning there's going to be a lineup. So what this tool does is it gives you real-time waiting time for each individual terminal. But more importantly, it also gives you predictive analytics. So what it does is it actually tells the trucker, if I go in at a certain time of the day, this is how much time I'll be waiting at each individual terminal. Of course, the big purpose on that is it enables the trucking companies to better manage their days. In other words, send the trucks in, maximize the truck utilization during the course of a day. So instead of, for example, doing 2 trips per day, maybe you can doing 3 trips per day. And what it also does, it also measures the reduction in greenhouse gases. So the fact that you don't have trucks waiting at the terminal for extended periods of time, less fuel, less consumption on fuel, reduction of greenhouse gases. So that's one of the projects that we're doing. We're also involved with Cargo AI. So basically what this is we received a $500,000 grant from the federal government. And this is as a result of COVID. And so one of the priorities in terms of when we were experiencing, when we're going through this COVID, is to ensure that cargoes that are considered essential, such as PPE, for example, are moved immediately off the port. So from that perspective, we've developed a tool which identifies which cargoes are on the ship. And so basically what this tool does, it goes through all the vessel manifests, identifies which cargoes are, whether it be medical equipment and so on and so forth. So we can get at it right away as soon as the vessel arrives, and we can distribute it to the necessary the areas that are required for the essential services. So at this point, basically, we can expedite the cargo once it's off the ship. Of course, the future plan is to get it at origin. So in other words, you can create a situation where you would load that essential cargo at certain areas of the vessel. So for example, you can do it on a below deck top tier. So it's one of the first containers that comes off. Just getting back before in terms of the tool that I showed you before in terms of predictive analytics, we're also using it in terms of to capture vessel arrival dates. If you look at the Port of Montreal, there's many moving parts. Again, Montreal is like an intermodal hub, if you will. Roughly 50% of our business moved by rail. The other 50% is by truck. And so therefore, when a vessel comes in, you basically have to coordinate labor at specific terminals. And we have 4 international container terminals, 5 if you include the Ocean X as a domestic terminal. You have to coordinate labor, you have to coordinate number of rail cars, you have to coordinate number of ships that are imported at the same time. So there's a lot of moving parts. So all this data capturing that we're doing is done with the purpose of course, including the fluidity and streamlining the whole operations. TradeLens, which is the final one, is basically to bring the shipping industry into a digital age through secure interface dedicated to freight transport. So what we want to do is we want to increase control delivery and operation schedules, provide easier access to clearance and billing documents, and therefore having greater fluidity, efficiency, transparency to the international shipping, and of course to do it in a safe and secure way. If I'm going too fast, just let me know. And finally, because of all the work that we've done in terms of on the innovation side and on the technological side, we were invited to join Chainport. Chainport is by invitation. It consists of roughly about 12 ports worldwide. In North America, the only 2 ports that are Chainport members is Montreal and the Port of Los Angeles. And basically, the purpose of Chainport is we address all of the major issues that affect ports today, whether it be community involvement, environment, fluidity, infrastructure. And from that perspective, really what we're looking for is to using or developing IT solutions to drive forward optimization of our traffic and goods within the harbor. In conclusion, I think we can all agree that in the last 8 or 9 months, COVID has really pushed forward our knowledge in using technology. I would say for about 10 years, we've all been forced to work from a distance, from outside the usual workplace. We use technology that existed in the past, such as video, the technologies exist in the past, such as video conferencing, so on and so forth, but never really used to the extent that we're using today. I would say in many cases, it's been very successful. We've seen it in terms of all the innovation and the technology that we've developed just in the last 12 months. And I think just the fact that we're able to have this webinar with roughly 100 people listening in and do it so easily, I think is a testament of how much knowledge we've all gained with this technology. Thank you very much. I'll stop sharing, and if you have any questions.
Tony and Bruce, that's just outstanding from both of you, and certainly some common themes emerging, between the rail side and the marine side. And I'll try to wrap up with those after our final speaker. Tony and Bruce, and this is not due to lack of interest, believe me, it's just due to trying to respect people's time. We're going to have to move on at this point to our final speaker, and that's on the air side of things. And so certainly not least of our panelists today, we're going to switch formats a little bit to get some insight on the air side. We're delighted to be joined by Ferio Pugliese, who is Air Canada's Senior Vice President of Air Canada Express and Government Relations. And rather than a panel and presentation, Ferio will share his insights with us in sort of a fireside chat format. So I'm sure that'll work out well. It'll be my first time doing this, Ferio, so hopefully I don't stumble around too much. So please keep your, to the audience, please keep your questions and comments coming via the Zoom chat, and I'll get to them as quickly as I can after I exercise my prerogative here as moderator to ask a few questions of Ferio on my own. So Ferio, for those who may not be familiar, please take a moment to explain the overall Air Canada operating structure and how Express fits in with that. You know, with the mainline carrier, with the Rouge product, maybe with jets and vacations, and I guess now with Air Transat. Maybe talk a little bit about the operating profile of Air Canada Express before pandemic hit, because obviously it's very, very different now, to give us a bit of an idea of the size and scope, the regions served, and so on.
Yeah, okay. Well, thanks very much, Paul, for the introduction. And to everyone at CILTNA, it's always a pleasure to be participating with all of you. I certainly look forward to the day we can all do this in person and that we can help connect you to wherever those meetings are going to be. I heard the other day that I think the most famous line of 2020 will be, "You're on mute." Anyways, thanks for having us here today. With respect to the structure of Air Canada, you know, essentially, I mean, we're a fully integrated global airline consisting of wide body flying, which is the international component that goes global. And then we've got obviously our domestic and what we call transborder, which is connectivity into the United States. So we fly, you know, obviously narrow body, wide body aircraft. And then we have a full-fledged regional fleet, which is under the Air Canada Express banner, which I have the privilege of overseeing as part of my responsibilities. You're obviously a network carrier. That's the critical aspect. So anytime we deploy assets, the assets are utilized in our space, and very much like everybody else around the room in the transportation industry, when these big assets are put to use, the business case is all around utilization. So when we back the business case off and we look at any one of those types of aircraft or assets, it's all about utilization and how much we can maximize that utilization via our network. So the Air Canada mainline brand obviously flies globally and domestically and transborder. The Rouge brand is sort of an offshoot of the mainline brand, which came into being in 2013 in an effort to compete in a more leisure market. So, you know, we tend to fill the domestic and international business climate with the mainline product. The Rouge product helps us also pick up a leisure traveler. In our business, we call it the VFR market, the visiting friends and relatives market. And so that allows us, so we have wide body, allows us to get into Europe, South America, the Caribbean, and also the United States, but it also has given us some opportunity to fly in and around Canada as well. And then you bring on the regional side with Air Canada Express. We have 150 airplanes in the fleet, roughly. The purpose of Air Canada Express is to feed the network. So we go out to all of the regional communities all across Canada. Our vast geography but sparse population obviously makes air travel, you know, somewhat of a critical necessity for a lot of these communities to get access to major hubs and also to the rest of the world. So our utilization model is many cycles. We probably make up, I'll say, about 30% to 35% of all of the cycles in the entire Air Canada network. So that's a lot of daily flights in and out back into the network. And I'd say roughly every second person getting on an aircraft on the regional express side is getting off and getting on a narrow body or wide body aircraft to connect somewhere else. So the network's really important to stabilizing and ensuring you have a regional network, because we can't build that just on regional local markets. And then obviously we've got the newest addition to the fleet, which we're quite proud of, Canadian-made former C series with the A220, which has entered the fleet and has actually given the overall network a lot more flexibility, because it's allowed us now to deseasonalize routes where we typically would fly in, you know, for 6 months of the year and then out for the remaining 6. Because of the economics on that aircraft and the range, it allows us to increase the level of service and the continuity of that service through the year. Post-pandemic, and maybe I'll just give you a bit of color on that with respect to the fleet and the impact here. Obviously, we've seen a dramatic takedown. We've seen over 200 aircraft grounded, of which 80 are permanent groundings, and of aircraft that have now permanently left the fleet. And on the Air Canada Express side, we are running with around 150 aircraft, inclusive of our spares, and we're now just south of 99 airplanes, between 95 and 99, depending on spares. So we've seen a 31% reduction in that fleet as well. So the nature of the pandemic has been, you know, obviously cataclysmic to our industry.
Absolutely, and we'll spend a little more time on the pandemic here in a moment. But just so we get a picture of your responsibilities, as you say, you're leading the entire Air Canada Express, but as I understand it, you're also responsible for government relations, which has obviously been a fairly hot topic, including as recently as this weekend. On that role, you cover the entire airline. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. Yeah, it's and that's I would say, obviously, since the pandemic has hit, I would say it's occupied 75 to 80% of my team's time, naturally, and obviously with the reduction, you know, we probably spent the first few months really downsizing the operation significantly, and then we turned our attention ever since, I'd say, around the 15th of March, to working closely with the government, everything from repatriating Canadians back to Canada to working through all of the needs around lobbying for government support for the industry, financial support for the industry, but in addition to dealing with quarantine measures, biosafety measures, and now the latest is a fair bit of work being done on the testing front.
Right. So you've already touched on quite a bit of this, but in terms of how you're managing the fleet and so on through the pandemic, what about the impact on your employees? Like, how have you been able to work with, support, reach out to your employees during this time that's been, you know, just unprecedented in terms of the impact on them?
Yeah, the impact on employees has been, I mean, it's been, like I said, it's cataclysmic. I mean, it's been a massive impact on overall employment. We're seeing upwards of 20,000 employees laid off in a furlough situation with recall. We've been obviously staying close to them in terms of communicating, you know, how the organization is moving and handling the pandemic. We've made use of some of the Canadian the emergency programs that have come out from the government in the early part of the year, in particular the Canadian Emergency Wage Subsidy Program. So many of our employees have been utilizing that program, which has certainly been well received, but nonetheless very difficult, because, you know, obviously some of those are employees that are receiving that, but it's unproductive work because we don't have the flying or the work for them to do. And until such time as we see demand recover, that's not going to change. You know, on the inside, the things that we've been trying to do, thinking more obviously to the future and getting through this, is a heavy focus on cost containment. So rigorous reduction of costs across the board in the organization. And then a very rigorous approach to capital preservation. So, you obviously, you can read in the news, and you've seen our latest results, burning through cash at quite a multiple a day. But in the grand scheme of things, we've been very competitive and trying to be competitive with, the rest of the industry around how we do that and doing it in measured fashion. So preserving capital, slowing down leases, we've slowed down aircraft orders and reduced aircraft orders. We've returned leases. We've grounded aircraft permanently. And so, we know that coming out of this, there's going to be a rebuild process because we're going to end up having to reinvest. But for now, it's all cash and a capital conservation model, most definitely.
And you mentioned, looking forward a bit, so many different things happening at the same time, be it second or third waves, be it, some news on the vaccination front, be it government policy in terms of what's allowed or not allowed. Are you able to put together a business plan over the next 6 or 12 months? And if so, what would that sort of look like?
It's very difficult. I'll just be blunt. I mean, Canada has imposed the stringest travel restrictions in the world. We have 14-day quarantines, for entrance into Canada. We have travel bans that are prohibiting foreign nationals from entering Canada. So essentially, Canada's closed. We have restrictions with the Canada-US border for the free flow of people even trying to do business. And then we have interprovincial travel borders and restrictions that exist. So, anybody east of Winnipeg can't get into Manitoba. And no one can get into the Atlantic provinces unless you go in the Atlantic and quarantine for 14 days, and you're not allowed into Newfoundland. So it is a policy-driven a sort of demand destructive environment, if I had to describe it best way. Okay, through these restrictions, essentially it's zeroed out the demand side of the equation. And never before have we ever seen this in this industry. I mean, we've lived through Zika and SARS and MERS, 9/11, but you've always seen that it hasn't been the policy front that's zeroed out the travel demand. So this, coupled with obviously the fear of the pandemic, and safety measures and so on, which we take very seriously, have really, really reduced, demand for travel. And it's quite astounding. I mean, if you look at it globally, it's about a $420 billion loss of revenue overall globally, and it's about 85 billion net of that net loss. So those are the pieces that we really need to start to see now. Canada evolving to where the rest of the world has evolved. Rest of the world has, in many cases, created safe corridors. They've worked on things like immunity passports. They have done things like introduce rapid testing at the point of entry to eliminate the quarantines or shorten the quarantines. And kudos to the province of Alberta, who did this last week. And early signs is the take up is immense. I mean, there are a lot of gaps to close, and they're working through the details of that. But the early signs of it is very positive. So, look, we are in the safety business. We don't take safety lightly. We have implemented biosafety measures to help address people moving safely through airports, on airplanes, and so on. But we also do believe that in the absence of vaccines, there are things that can be done that layer onto safety in addition to PPEs and distancing, like testing and contact tracing, that can help. And that's what the rest of the world is doing. They're creating safe corridors and zones to do business.
And staying with that theme for just a moment longer, Ferio, the government policy, government restrictions, and so on are sort of one side of it, but there's also the individual's feeling about flying or really doing anything. And there's been a number of studies, I'm sure you're much more familiar than I, that suggests that perhaps the whole quote unquote fear of flying issue for individuals has been a little bit overdone. And actually, at our session yesterday, the deputy minister mentioned that he felt that the risk of airline travel was really quite low, and actually mentioned that sort of similar to going to the grocery store, or perhaps even safer than going to the grocery store, given all the work that's been done. So do you have some thoughts on how you can, you're obviously working very hard on the government front. Do you have some thoughts on how you can work as well with your customers and potential customers to get them over that sort of hurdle and say, hey, we are doing all these things. Your safety is our greatest concern.
Yeah, no, great question. And look, I'll say this, they have to be done in tandem. we need the government working with the regulator, with the consumer right now, because we're in a state where the people are looking to the government to say, hey, you know, between public health and the regulator, give us guidance around what's safe to do. And then the operators, irrespective of what business they're in, is saying, are you following those protocols and are you demonstrating care for your customers? So we have to work together on this. I mean, the one thing I would say in all my years in this business, never once have I seen the collaboration across this industry between associations, regulators, airport authorities, suppliers, operators come together and say, look, you know, for the sake of using an overused term, we're all in this together, but practically saying we got to come up with solutions. These are not issues of a commercial nature. Let's get things moving again. I do want to highlight the tremendous work that Deputy Minister Keenan is doing. He and his team have had their shoulder to the wheel on this ever since this has started, and we've been working very closely with them. And the first product we published was a document called the Flight Plan, which worked with his safety and security team along with his policy team at Transport, and collectively worked across the industry, airports and airlines, to build the flight plan. What's contained in there are the protocols around biosafety. So, you know, initially you'll see they had interim orders saying everyone needs to wear a mask. You know, we were one of the first airlines to go out with that just as a standard for our employees and for our customers. And then, you know, the regulator said, yeah, that should be a standard as the world's evolved. Let's put that in as standard interim order. Then one thing we put in, we started this program called Clean Care Plus, which was a sanitization of the cabin, education on the HEPA filtration systems in the airplanes, you know, removal of hard surface of objects and cleaning of hard surfaces and so on. And then the introduction of the temperature checks. That then got embedded in an interim order where mandatory temperature checks. So all of those good measures rapidly, as everybody was responding, coalesced and is now baked into this thing called the Flight Plan. And if you go through the Flight Plan, it lays out all of those things around safety in the airport, safety in the aircraft, and how do we continue to move forward. So I'd say the next frontier of the Flight Plan would be to start to introduce now measures around what are we doing for contact tracing, what are we doing now for testing. And now that's the next operating plan that we're building to attach to this, because we believe testing is coming more en masse over the course of the next, you know, 4 or 5 months, that we'll probably see that arise in airports and in public places, and it fits into this. But to your point, a lot of the studies will highlight this, and I'm glad that Deputy Minister Keenan talked about it, because, you know, IATA's, you know, report got a lot of coverage in 2020. There's 44 cases of COVID out of, you know, 1.2 billion passengers. But we know through the studies, through what the airline and aircraft manufacturers have done, but also through what independent studies have done, U.S. Defense. There's a recent study being done by Harvard that says it's very, 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 very unlikely you're going to contract COVID on an aircraft for the very reasons I just mentioned. All of the measures that are in place.
Oh, that's great, Ferio. I'm going to turn to the chat now. We've got some questions coming in via the chat, and would encourage other audience members to submit some more. So first of all, is the back to a point you made a few moments ago about the A220, is this aircraft too large for Air Canada Express's regional needs?
It is. For regional, yes, it is. I would say there are probably a few regional routes where you could run 220. And, you know, that's always, you know, if I think of the world, when the world recovers and so on, that's not out of the realm of possibilities. I mean, you know, we've had Rouge running in some regional routes where we've swapped out CRJ 900s for A220s. For 321s and there's 320s. So yes, it's possible, but I would say it's a very, very small portion. I mean, I could probably count on one hand the routes that we might be able to cycle those into.
Okay, great. And another question from the audience. We'll call it either the good old days or the bad old days when government set airfares. There wasn't a lot of creativity possible for managing yield, relating yield to utilization and so on. And of course, those days are long gone, and very creative and dynamic pricing is the norm. Is there much potential for more progress in this area? And would it be aimed more at network utilization, aircraft utilization, profitability, or some other goal?
Well, yeah, it's quite a question. I mean, there's a lot there. I mean, I would say all of the above. I mean, I think what the airline industry has learned, in particular in Canada, if I look at it in the Canadian space, one of the highest cost jurisdictions to operate. So if you think pre-COVID, all things being equal, life is back to normal. You know, it's a fee for service operation. You know, airports are, you know, they still pay hefty ground rents to the government of Canada. And then users, it's a user pay model as you access and work through the airport. That's not the same or the case in most places around the world. I mean, 95+% of the cases around the world don't operate that way. In the US, our closest competitor, largest aviation market in the world, doesn't operate that way. So that user pay model has a real impact on overall cost and has impacted demand for travel. I mean, put a fine point on it. The Canadian population, you know, probably we're sitting at around 30 to 32% of the Canadian population uses air travel. Okay, so it isn't a huge market. But that market can be expanded with a number of things. Aircraft utilization obviously brings unit costs down. If there are ways in which we could move some of the airport infrastructure costs off into sort of a general tax base, which is what other countries do, you would see that cost of user service going down, because upwards sometimes of 60% of a fare, an airline fare, is taxes, fees, and services. So, you know, if that were to come down, then you would see an opportunity to even have greater flexibility on pricing, managing inventory, and on demand for travel going up. Because obviously through the reduction in cost, you're going to obviously stimulate some more demand for air travel in a country that obviously needs to be accessing that more.
Great. And another question from the audience, and this from a member of ours who is definitely served by regional air transportation out in beautiful Vancouver Island, Comox, BC. Is the government making financial assistance to airlines conditional on serving or continuing to serve specific routes?
Well, they've certainly intimated that. There's no specifics as of yet, but you know, you can bet that if there's a sector relief program to come, which we're still waiting for, and as of this weekend, you saw the latest announcement by the Minister of Transportation, which we were very encouraged to see. Obviously, regional transport, regional connectivity is certainly going to be a topic of discussion. We're pretty certain it will, and is actually even mentioned in the throne speech. So, you know, it remains to be seen what that is and how we address that. I mean, you know, I'll put this. I said, you know, we took down 30 regional routes across Canada. We're not happy about that at all. We wish we were not having to do that. Our largest competitors had to follow up and do similar things. But to give you just put a finer point on that, you know, we're burning in the neighborhood of $15 million a day, 500 million a month, and 1.5 billion a quarter. So even the strongest balance sheets cannot withstand that for a long period of time. It's just not possible. And you know, people, you know, oftentimes it gets mixed that, you know, the obligation is purely to shareholders. Well, of course, the obligation is to shareholders. We're a publicly traded company. We're a business. But we take that obligation as equal and as balanced as our obligation to the Canadian public and to our customers. And if you're not trying to preserve and if I'd say protect structural damage to the company for the long term, then you're not going to be able to come out of this the right way and be able to get back to servicing what you once had. Hence the reason we're so adamant about pursuing the government on a relief program. You know, it's happened everywhere else in the world. Canada has not received anything. You know, there's a talk about $1 billion going to the airline sector, and that's through the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy Program. But just to, you know, give you the quick math on that, we appreciate that, and our employees appreciate that. But of that portion, I speak at Air Canada, we probably got about 330 million of that, which is not insignificant. But do the math. 330 to 340 million divided by 15 gives you 23 plus days. So, you know, it needs to be larger, and it needs to be in the form of liquidity vehicles at low interest rates, which is what we saw around the world, and which is helping stand up other airlines.
Ferrio, those are that almost sounded like it could flow into your concluding remarks. So we do have a couple other questions, but you know, just given the time and your generous donation of your time, do you have any final comments that you'd like to make before we wrap up the conference?
No, I think what I would say first and foremost is to everybody on the call and at the conference, you know, first of all, we all share the same passion around transportation. It's the business we're in. I want to really personally thank all of you on the call and at this conference on behalf of Air Canada, because we know that many of you have been and are loyal customers and have used our services, and you know, are probably loyalty members as well. So we really appreciate that, because without your ongoing support and your loyalty to us, we wouldn't be an airline where we've been able to. Very nice, 50K. I'm looking forward to getting you to 100K. But we wouldn't be doing what we're doing or able to stand this up if you weren't there right there with us. Like I said, I hope we're getting to a place where we bring people back together again. But I do think there's, you know, opportunity as an industry where we continue to share with government the importance of transportation, you know, infrastructure, because the worry that I have through this pandemic is that there's structural changes happening where we're not reinvesting in our systems. Now, I'm not a railway guy, so I won't speak to that, but I would think reinvestment in railway infrastructure needs to happen, and marine infrastructure. It's the same in the aviation space. You know, we've got aviation infrastructure that needs to be reinvested in. It needs to be kept up and so on. And the longer this goes without any level of relief or an injection of support, we run the risk of now lagging on some of that investment, and which puts us behind reinvesting and growing the business. And if you're not reinvesting and growing the business, then we're not able to bring back the connectivity that we once had for Canadians to connect around the world, around the globe. And then suddenly we find ourselves out of step and not competitive with global carriers. So, you know, I'll just leave you with that. I mean, it's just a pure business piece, but you know, I'll just close with this. Once again, thank you all for your ongoing support of our company. And, you know, we look forward to better days.
Absolutely, absolutely, Ferrio, as do we all. And we certainly, the aviation sector in Canada punches far, far, far above its weight in terms of bringing Canadians and the country together. And I'm sure I can speak for everyone on the conference here to say that we really appreciate that. Well, everyone, I'll just take a minute or two to wrap up. You know, the themes that we heard from all of our panels and panelists, and from Ferrio as well. There's a lot of commonality here, which I don't think should be surprising, given that we're all in the transportation and logistics business. Real employee focus, first and foremost, on their safety, their health, their well-being, the development of a company culture and a culture of safety amongst employees, the essential nature of the services that we all provide, regardless of mode or sector within transportation and logistics. The continued importance of innovation, thinking outside the box, as Phil Lang put it, digitization, a common theme through, you know, across many of the modes, the customer service focus, the only way we're going to grow our businesses and be successful in the long term. Collaboration, as Ferrio noted, you know, between potential customers, carriers, government agencies, worldwide supply chain partners, and so on. And finally, the resilience that all of our sectors and subsectors have demonstrated in the face of this unprecedented, and again, to steal Ferrio's phrase, or Ferrio's word, cataclysmic pandemic. So congratulations to all carriers. So again, just very briefly, I want to thank all of our speakers for taking the time to speak with us today. And again, it's much more time. Ferrio's been with us on this call here, for example, for maybe 20, 25 minutes. Believe me, there was a lot more involved than 20 or 25 minutes. And in speaking to us today. So thanks again to all the speakers. And again, as CILTNA, we thank all sponsors, and you see them again on the screen. And we could not continue to do what we do without our sponsors. That's our pillar sponsors, Greater Toronto Airports and Canadian Pacific, and our session sponsors that you see listed there. Greatly appreciate it. And finally, thanks to all the audience for participating yesterday and today. We greatly appreciate it. We hope to see you at future CILTNA webinars, and we thank you very much. And with that, we close our Fall Outlook Conference for 2020. Thanks again.